We came all the way to this shabby house, so you better treat us well today.
My son, Nick, who was visiting after a long time, didn't even bother to greet us properly and started acting arrogantly as soon as he entered the house. His wife, Rachel, who came along, looked completely different from the last time we saw her, dressed much more flamboyantly. I had been looking forward to seeing them, but I was shocked by their unexpected behavior.
We brought your beloved Laura, so of course you'll treat us to lunch, right?
We don't plan on staying long, so please hurry up and prepare it.
Their rudeness left me more confused than angry. Sensing my distress, my cherished granddaughter, Laura, came over to me as they were getting ready to leave. Sweet Laura was still the same kind child as always.
Grandma, thank you for today. I have a little gift for you.
Feeling comforted by Laura's innocence, I held out my hands. She turned the back of my hand up with her small hands and suddenly started doodling on each of my nails.
Aren't they pretty? Look closely.
Laura said proudly, but before I could respond, Rachel, who was impatient to leave, took Laura away. To anyone else, the drawings on my nails would just look like childish doodles. However, when my husband, Scott, and I looked at them, our faces suddenly turned serious. Realizing that the drawings contained her distress message from Laura, Scott and I decided to confront Nick at his house. My name is Ashley, and I'm 61 years old. I met my husband, Scott, who is 2 years older than me, in my 20s through a mutual friend. Scott is self-employed, and his income wasn't stable, so I took on the role of the breadwinner, working as a care manager while raising our son, Nick, diligently. Nick is now in his 30s, married, and has a kid. On the surface, it seems like a typical life for someone approaching retirement age. However, an incident completely changed my family environment. It started 3 years ago. On my way to the grocery store, I was hit by a car that ran a red light. Although my life was not in danger, I broke both legs and had to be hospitalized for 6 months. I was reluctant to take a long break from work, so I decided to take early retirement at 58. Scott is still working, and we had savings for our retirement, so becoming a homemaker wasn't a big problem. However, around the time I was hospitalized, Nick divorced his wife, Katie. I was shocked and asked Nick why they divorced.
Katie said she didn't want to take care of you and left. She's so selfish. Divorcing her was the right decision.
But once my fractures heal, I won't need care. Even so, you divorced her? Are you okay with that, Nick?
It's already decided, and there's nothing we can do about it.
If only I hadn't had that car accident, Nick's family wouldn't have fallen apart. Thinking it was my fault that Nick got divorced made me feel incredibly guilty. What worried me most was Nick's daughter, Laura. She was our first grandchild, and we had doted on her. I still remember how Scott and I cried together when we first held Laura. Who will take care of Laura?
Since Katie left because of her own issues, I'll take her, of course. You and Dad will help with raising her, right?
Hearing that Nick would take Laura made me feel relieved, though I felt sorry for Katie. Of course, I couldn't say I was entirely without worries. Nick works for a fairly large event company, and his job often requires weekend work and overtime. I was concerned about how he would manage as a single father in such circumstances. Fortunately, Nick's apartment is close to our house, and Scott is home most of the time due to his work. Because I felt guilty that my injury had caused his divorce, Scott and I took care of Laura after I was discharged from the hospital. At that time, Laura was already in the first grade. Since she was old enough to do many things by herself, taking care of her mainly involved feeding her dinner, helping with homework, and looking after her until Nick returned to his apartment. Laura preferred spending time indoors rather than playing outside. After we started looking after her, she often stayed in Scott's study room, reading books and chatting. Honestly, considering our age and how much slower we've become compared to our younger years, Laura's calm personality was a relief. 2 years after we started caring for Laura, Nick, who was then 33, announced he was getting remarried and brought his new wife to our home.
I'd like to introduce you to Rachel, who's 5 years younger than me. It's been 2 years since my divorce, and it's not fair to rely on you and Dad for Laura's care, so Rachel and I are getting married and starting over as a family.
Thank you for taking care of Laura. From now on, I'll be her mother and look after her, so we won't need to bother you as often.
Living with Laura had become the norm, so I felt a bit lonely, but I knew she would keep growing while we only aged. I believed Laura needed a mother who could be there for her, so I supported Nick's decision to marry Rachel. However, as soon as Nick got married, both he and Laura stopped coming to our house. They would only visit occasionally, and the visits were brief. Nick's house, which was within walking distance, also changed as they moved to another apartment after the marriage, making it harder to visit them. I didn't feel comfortable visiting the newlyweds' home, especially since I didn't know Rachel well. Scott and I felt lonely but held back our desire to see Laura, thinking about her future. A year after Nick's remarriage, he unexpectedly called to say they would visit during their vacation. I was excited to see them and was looking forward to it all morning. When the doorbell rang signaling their arrival, I hurried to the door and opened it. When I opened the door, Nick and his family standing there looked very different from how I had imagined them. Both Nick and Rachel had flashy outfits and hairstyles, wearing branded bags and noticeable accessories. They were like completely different people from when they had come to introduce Rachel. Without a proper greeting, they walked in with an arrogant attitude.
We've come all the way to this shabby house, so you better treat us well today. Let's have some fancy steak for lunch. Since we brought Laura, whom you love so much, of course, you'll treat us, right?
We don't plan to stay long, so could you hurry and order?
Their behavior was so appalling that I was more bewildered than angry. I thought about reprimanding them, but felt guilty about Nick's divorce, and was also grateful to Rachel for raising Laura, who wasn't her biological child. Thinking it was a rare occasion, and deciding to let it slide, I called the steakhouse to place an order from the hallway. As I was on the phone, Laura came over to me.
Grandma, is there anything I can help with?
Laura, always kind and considerate, was now in the 4th grade, taller, and looking more mature. I felt relieved that despite the new family, Laura hadn't changed at all. No need to help. Would you like to play with Grandma instead?
Yes. I want to chat with you, Grandma. You know.
Hey, Laura, don't bother your grandma. Come here.
Just as Laura was about to say something, Rachel came from the living room and took Laura back. Laura fell silent and reluctantly left my side, and I didn't get another chance to talk to her. I'm not bothered at all. I wonder if they're being overly cautious. After we had eaten the steak, Scott said he needed to return to work and left us. Seizing the moment, Nick also announced that it was time for them to leave. Their visit was so brief, it felt like they only came for lunch, and I found it hard to part with Laura.
I'm not sure when we'll come next, but make sure to treat us well again. Come on, Laura, we're leaving.
Wait a moment, Dad.
As she said that, Laura came over to me with a big smile. In her hand was a red marker she had taken from the pen holder.
Thank you for lunch today, Grandma. I want to give you a present. Hold out your hands.
I was charmed by Laura's innocent gesture and obediently held out my hands. What could she be giving me? Whatever it is, I'll be happy if it's from Laura. I held out my palms, but Laura flipped my hands over. With her small hand, she turned my wrinkled hand over so the back was facing up. Then, she removed the cap from the marker and suddenly began doodling on each of my nails.
Do you know what this is? It's called nail art. I'm going to make your hands look pretty, Grandma.
I was impressed that Laura, even as a young elementary school student, already knew about nail art and had an interest in fashion. Since I had worked in social welfare until a few years ago, I had rarely done anything to care for my hands, let alone paint my nails. While I felt a bit uneasy about having something drawn on my nails, I decided to let Laura do as she pleased since I was now a homemaker.
All done. Isn't it great? Look closely.
After finishing the drawings on my 10 nails, Laura smiled proudly. I brought my hands closer to my face to see what she had drawn and found them covered with childlike illustrations of hearts and stars. On the pinky of my right hand, Laura had written her name in the small space, like an artist's signature. Just as I was about to thank Laura, Rachel, who had been impatiently urging them to leave, took Laura's hand and left. And so, Nick and his family's visit ended abruptly. Later that night, I was washing the dishes when Scott, noticing how tired I looked, decided to make coffee for me. While Scott boiled water, we reflected on the events of the day.
Nick and Rachel seem to have changed a bit, don't they?
I was quite surprised. Rachel, too. They both seemed a bit too flashy.
Well, it seems they aren't having financial troubles. Laura seemed as cheerful as ever, and if we interfere too much, they might resent us.
Yes, but there were a few things that concerned me. Laura seemed eager to talk about something the entire time, but in the end, I never got to hear what it was. Whenever she tried to come closer to chat with me or Scott, Rachel would stop her. We barely exchanged a few words. Just as I noticed Scott looking at me, waiting for me to speak, he pointed at my hand.
What happened there?
I immediately realized he was referring to the doodles Laura had drawn, so I stopped washing the dishes and showed my hands to Scott. Apparently, Laura had used a permanent marker, and the drawings didn't come off with just a rinse. Laura drew this just before she left. Isn't it well done?
Laura drew this. Maybe your strange feeling is right. This must be a message from Laura.
What? What do you mean? I was surprised by Scott's unexpected statement. To me, it looked like nothing more than a child's doodles. But Scott insisted it was something Laura wanted to convey.
Look closely at your both hands. From the left pinky to the right, there are 3 hearts, 3 stars, and 3 hearts again. It's Laura's Morse code.
In the beginning, I thought Scott was joking. However, as Scott took my hand and examined it closely with a serious expression, the atmosphere grew heavy. Sensing this, Scott led me to his study. Entering the room for the first time in a while, I saw that it was still filled with books covering the entire wall, and the desk was piled with manuscript paper. Yes, Scott is a mystery novelist. However, he's not a well-known author, and his income is less than that of an average office worker. So until 3 years ago, I was the primary breadwinner of our family. Scott opened a box from the bottom drawer of his desk without hesitation, revealing a stack of letters written on cute stationery that didn't match his room.
These are letters from Laura. She used to write them while I was working, reading books from this room.
Are these really letters, not just doodles? The letters weren't words or sentences, but rather a series of hearts and stars arranged randomly, just like the drawings on my nails.
It took me a while to realize, but this is Laura's version of Morse code. Hearts are short signals, and stars are long signals. It looks random, but when you combine the short and long signals, they form letters.
No way. It's hard to believe a child that young would know something like that.
Laura is very smart. She doesn't play outside much, but she's read through all the mystery novels in this room. If she doesn't know a word, she looks it up or asks me.
So, if this really is Morse code, what does it say?
3 hearts means and 3 stars mean all. So, the message on your nails reads solace.
Scott's deduction shocked me. It felt like a scene from a mystery novel where the characters discover the identity of the culprit. What? No way. If this really is Laura's SOS signal, what is she asking to be rescued from? Saying that, I suddenly realized. All day, Laura had seemed like she wanted to tell me something. It wasn't because the topic was difficult to discuss, it was because she was afraid someone would hear. And the people Laura was wary of were Nick and Rachel. She didn't want her parents to hear what she had to say, but she wanted to leave a message for me, so she drew it on my nails. Could it be that Laura is experiencing something terrible at home?
Maybe, but it could also be that we're overthinking. Still, Laura's behavior was definitely strange, and I'm worried. It's late now, so should we visit their house tomorrow?
Yes, let's do that. I knew his new address Nick had moved to after remarrying, but I had never visited. Scott and I decided to go there without telling them. I hope nothing is wrong with Laura. I kept praying for that, and before I knew it, morning had arrived without me getting much sleep. The next day, we headed to their house in Scott's car early in the morning. It was a scorching hot day, and the summer sun blazed through the car windows. When we reached the address Nick had given us, we found a newly built apartment complex. However, even though it was still early in the morning, Nick's car wasn't in the parking lot. Nick's job is busy this time of year, but according to what he said yesterday, he should have had 3 more days off. Maybe they all went out, but since we're here, let's at least ring the doorbell. Feeling a strange sense of unease, I suggested it, and Scott agreed. We parked the car in an empty space and moved to their apartment. 2 adult umbrellas and 1 child's umbrella were propped up outside the entrance, indicating we had the right place. We exchanged a glance and nodded, and I nervously pressed the doorbell. The chime sounded, and we waited outside the door for a while, but there was no response from inside. Were we just overthinking this? Just as we were about to leave.
Grandma,
A faint voice came from the intercom. Laura is inside. Laura, are you there? Can you unlock the door for us?
But Dad and Mom told me not to open the door for anyone.
Oh no.
It's okay. Grandma and I are here because your dad asked us to come. Can you open the door for us?
Really? Okay, I'll unlock it now.
Hearing Laura's faint voice, so unlike her usual cheerful self, Scott's worry grew. He quickly lied to guide Laura into unlocking the door. We heard the slow turn of the lock, and when I opened the door, I found Laura slumped against the wall, looking exhausted. I hurried over and held her, feeling that her body was burning hot. The room was sweltering, likely because the air conditioner was off. At the same time, a pungent odor hit me, almost making me gag. Looking around, I saw trash and cigarette butts scattered everywhere, making it look like a hoarder's houses from a news report. How could Laura be here alone in such an environment? Laura, what's wrong? Stay with me.
This isn't good. She might have heat stroke. We need to get her to a hospital now.
Scott carried Laura to the car, where the air conditioning was still running, and we rushed to the nearest hospital. Laura was on the verge of heat stroke, but she began to recover after receiving treatment at the hospital. Thinking about what could have happened if we had left any later made me shiver. While we were at the hospital, Scott repeatedly tried to call Nick, but there was no answer, not even a ring. What on earth is going on? We brought Laura back home and decided to ask her what had happened. We got your message, Laura. You wrote it here because you wanted us to rescue you from that house, right?
Grandma,
As I showed her my nails, Laura's eyes filled with tears, and she began to cry loudly like a child. Even though she had started to look more mature, she was still a girl not yet 10 years old. Realizing she must have been holding on, hoping someone would help her, I couldn't help but cry with her. After crying for a while, Laura finally calmed down and started to tell us what had been happening. Summarizing Laura's story, this is what happened. Nick and Rachel had left for a trip last night, leaving Laura alone. They told her there was some jelly and ice cream in the fridge, and no money, and that she would have to survive on that for 3 days. The house had been filthy for a long time, and despite Laura's efforts to clean, it would get dirty again quickly because none of the adults would help. Last night, it was so hot that she wanted to turn on the air conditioner, but she couldn't find the remote in the piles of trash.
Dad and Mom told me not to tell anyone about their trip, but I was scared to be alone in that house, so I did your nails yesterday, Grandma.
According to Laura, this wasn't the first time they had left her alone. Scott and I were furious after hearing Laura's story. What Nick and Rachel were doing was clearly abuse. We couldn't leave Laura in such a terrible environment any longer. Still, there was no response from Nick or Rachel, so Scott and I decided on a course of action. A few days after Laura had been left alone, after repeatedly trying to call, Nick finally returned my call.
What's up, Mom? I'm busy, so make it quick.
I just want to ask you one thing, Nick. How is Laura doing?
Laura? Oh, she's napping right next to me. Why?
Really? That's interesting because Laura is napping right next to me right now.
What?
I decided to test Nick, and sure enough, he lied. Since that day, Laura has been staying at our house, so there's no way she could be next to Nick. You left Laura and went on a trip, didn't you? And to a place overseas where you couldn't be reached by phone.
What the hell? You tricked me? So Laura is with you? I was wondering why she wasn't at the house.
What are you talking about? This isn't the first time you've left her alone. Laura nearly suffered from heat stroke. What you're doing is abuse. We've already got all the evidence. The day we brought Laura to our house, Scott immediately hired a private investigator to look into Nick and Rachel's behavior. Through interviews with neighbors and Nick's coworkers, we gathered evidence of their abusive actions toward Laura. With Laura's testimony, they couldn't deny it. When we presented the evidence, Nick was panicked.
You hired a private investigator to spy on your own son? That's a violation of privacy, even for parents.
If you were a responsible parent, we wouldn't have had to do this. We can't trust you or Rachel anymore. Stay out of our lives. We're taking Laura.
Fine by me. Laura was creepy, always staying in her room reading books instead of acting like a normal kid. I'll live my life with Rachel. Just make sure you never show your faces to us again.
Nick shouted and hung up the phone. I had angrily cut ties with Nick, and though I felt some regret about how this ended, I wondered if this was really the best outcome for Laura. We'll make sure Laura is happy with us. As I stroked Laura's head while she slept peacefully, I made a vow in my heart. However, we faced numerous problems. While we had taken Laura in, legally adopting her was complicated. She didn't have to change schools, but practically speaking, raising our grandchild would present various challenges. After much contemplation, I finally gathered the courage to call a certain person. 3 years later, we found ourselves at a family-friendly party hosted by an event company. And of course, Laura was with us. Laura was now in 7th grade and was excited to wear a pretty dress. During the mingling before the party started, I noticed a familiar figure holding a glass of champagne. I immediately knew who it was. Nick and Rachel. As we stared in surprise, they also noticed us and were equally stunned, but soon walked over and started hurling insults.
What are you doing here? And with Laura? This isn't a place for ordinary people. Get out.
We were invited, so we came. Is there any problem? Why are you here?
I changed jobs. After you hired that private investigator and questioned my coworkers, I couldn't stay at my old company, but it turned out for the best, moving to this event company. It's a smaller company than the last one, but it's a growing venture, and I'm on good terms with the CEO, Eric, so I'm expecting a good position. It's hard to pursue a career with a kid around, so it's good that Laura is gone.
Laura hid behind me, trying to avoid Nick. Nick's loud bragging drew the attention of everyone around us. The party had been nice, but the atmosphere was ruined, and we felt embarrassed as Rachel joined in and started insulting us too.
I don't know who invited you, but you are completely out of place here. The exit is over there, so please leave immediately.
Rachel's right. Get out of here before you embarrass us any further.
Scott and I felt utterly humiliated and wanted to disappear from Nick's sight. As we tried to move away with Laura, Nick's boss and the party host, Eric, stepped in front of us. Nick, emboldened by Eric's presence, continued.
Eric, these old folks and the kid seem to have crashed the party by mistake. Can we kick them out? It's so ridiculous. It's funny.
You idiot!
Eric, who appeared to be in his 40s with a rugged look, suddenly punched Nick. Rachel screamed in shock, and Nick, holding his left cheek, looked bewildered, not understanding what had just happened.
How dare you say something so disrespectful? You're involved in this event and don't even know who these people are. This is the author of the best-selling mystery novel, Sleepless Night Express. Our company is hosting a special escape game event in collaboration with his book.
What? Are you saying Dad is a novelist?
I deeply apologize for my employees' rudeness.
Eric said, turning to Scott. Nick, who had always loved playing outside as a child and had mocked Scott's work as gloomy, didn't know this fact. And he finally realized that Scott, the person making headlines and creating a buzz, was his own father. Last year, Scott's mystery novel became a huge hit, making him a sudden celebrity. The novel was already being adapted into a comic and a movie, and it was constantly featured on news programs.
I've spent most of my life as an unsuccessful novelist. It's no wonder Nick didn't know. While you may have disrespected me, there's someone else you should apologize to.
Yes, you're right.
Eric then turned to Laura. Nick and Rachel looked at him in disbelief.
Laura,
You know, Sleepless Night Express is a co-creation, right? The other author is Laura.
With Eric gesturing toward her, Laura nodded. In fact, Laura was the one who came up with the concept for Sleepless Night Express. Laura, who had always loved books, possessed an extraordinary talent for writing. She created the storyline and the tricks, and Scott turned them into his novel. The characters Laura created were incredibly compelling, which appealed to people who typically didn't read and to the younger generation, leading to the book's massive success.
this can't be real. Laura, a novelist? I always thought she was just a creepy kid who stayed inside. I had no idea she had such talent. So, she must have earned a huge amount of money, right?
How can you think so selfishly? Yes, the royalties are split with Laura, but it's all for her future. It has nothing to do with you, Nick.
Shut up. Laura is my child. You and Dad are just getting older, so she should be with us.
Nick grabbed Laura's thin arm with force, pulling her towards him. Laura struggled desperately, but she didn't have the strength to break free from an adult man's grip. As we hesitated, unsure how to stop Nick, Laura was caught. The next moment, someone approached from behind Nick, pried his hand off Laura, and in a flash, slammed Nick to the floor. Laura looked at the person and, with relief and joy, exclaimed,
Mom.
The person who had taken down Nick with martial arts was Laura's real mother, Katie. I had invited Katie to today's party, and she said she would come after work. Her perfectly timed entrance was met with cheers from the surrounding crowd. 3 years ago, when we took Laura in, I had mustered the courage to contact Katie. Katie, who worked as a police officer, had left town immediately after the divorce and now worked at a police station in another town. I had heard that Katie had initiated the divorce because she didn't want to take care of me, so calling her took a lot of courage. However, that call revealed a shocking truth. Katie told me that Nick had deceived her into a forced divorce. At the time of their divorce, Nick was already having an affair with Rachel, and Katie had suspected it. Fearing he would lose money to alimony, Nick framed Katie for infidelity. He hired a man to pose with Katie, took incriminating photos to make it look like she was having an affair, and used them to threaten her. Nick submitted the divorce papers without her consent and demanded she pay alimony and child support if she didn't want her workplace and friends to know about the fabricated affair. With no family to support her, Katie feared losing her job and livelihood and had no choice but to comply. Nick pretended that Katie left to take care of me, using that as an excuse to enjoy his affair with the child support money he received every month, while leaving Laura's care to Scott and me.
Katie, what are you doing here?
Ashley invited me. This is an important event for Laura. As her mother, of course, I'd be here. I didn't expect to see you, but now that we're all here, I have a few things to say. You abandoned Laura's care to Ashley and Scott, making it seem like you were raising her to get child support from me. That's not.
Nick had taken Laura in and married Rachel just to create the appearance of caring for her. He was deceiving Katie into paying child support, which he used to fund their lavish lifestyle. Even after Laura started living with us, Katie continued to pay child support to Nick. But that was part of Katie's plan.
I'm finally ready to sue you. Thanks to the lawyer and private investigator Scott introduced me to, we've gathered all the evidence. Forging divorce papers, fraud, blackmail, and even rape. I kept paying child support to avoid raising suspicion, but I'll be getting all that money back.
Katie pulled out a thick envelope from her bag and showed it to Nick, who was still on the floor, unable to stand. Nick and Rachel were stunned and sweating. Confronted with the facts, they seemed unable to find any words to respond. Laura clung to Katie, watching the scene unfold.
Eric, I'm sorry for the trouble Nick caused, but given the circumstances, it would be difficult for Nick and Laura to work together. Laura is clearly scared. Can we pretend this never happened?
Please wait. Our company is betting everything on this project. There are many sponsors eagerly awaiting this event, and we can't cancel it now.
Eric, realizing the situation, turned to Nick, got down on one knee, and confronted him.
This entire mess is because of your selfish actions. Take responsibility and leave the company immediately, or we will sue you for damages.
No way.
Surrounded by everyone, Nick and Rachel hung their heads in defeat. They looked like culprits revealed by a detective, with the dramatic ending of a mystery show playing in my head. Afterward, Eric fired Nick from the company, and the escape game event went ahead as planned. Eric apologized to us for what happened at the party, but it was really us who should have apologized. I couldn't help but wonder where we went wrong in raising him. His disgraceful actions have caused trouble for so many people, and I felt a deep sense of shame as his parent. With everything resolved, we apologized to Katie.
The selfish actions of adults are not caused by how they were raised.
Katie said, forgiving us with words befitting a police officer. Nick, who had to repay Katie's alimony and child support in a lump sum, reportedly got involved with loan sharks and disappeared after making the payment. Rachel divorced Nick, sold her brand name bags and accessories to pay Katie alimony, and is now living in extreme poverty. Several years have passed. The mystery novels created by Scott and Laura, known as the Train series, have garnered a large following, eagerly awaiting each new release.
If it weren't for Laura, I would have remained a mediocre novelist.
Scott said self-deprecatingly, smiling, while saving most of the royalties for Laura's future. The remaining money was set aside for our future move to a retirement home. Don't worry, Laura and Katie. We won't be a burden to you.
If it's you and Scott, I'd be happy to take care of you, Ashley.
It's okay. We just want you two to live happily without any worries. We recently completed the process of legally adopting Katie as our daughter. This made it easier to transfer our assets and ultimately improved Laura's life as well. Since the series of events, everyone had worried about Laura's emotional scars. But the moment it was decided that Katie would live with us, Laura felt completely at ease and showed a beaming smile. It seems nothing can replace a real mother. Feeling a bit wistful, I was reading the latest installment of the Train series. Satisfied with another excellent piece, I was about to close the book when I saw a handwritten message from Laura at the end. Seeing the illustrations drawn around the page, I hurriedly took the book to Scott. It was a long message from Laura, composed of hearts and stars. After carefully deciphering it, Scott smiled and told me,
"Grandpa, Grandma, thank you for everything."
"The public is abuzz, trying to decode this message that only we can understand."